Florence, a city known for its breathtaking art and soaring domes, harbored a dark secret beneath its polished marble. The powerful Medici family, patrons of beauty, also wove a terrifying tapestry of betrayal, poison, and murder into the very heart of the Renaissance. Forget your history books for a moment. This is the real story, unfiltered, of 8 moments when the Medici name sent shivers down the spines of all who knew it. Get ready. Number 8. The poisoning of Cardinal Ippolito de' Medici. The hot summer of 1535 brought with it a suffocating tension in the air, a silent battle of wills between 2 young Medici men. Cardinal Ippolito de' Medici, a figure known for his love of lavish banquets, hunting, and beautiful women, also harbored a deep, simmering ambition for political power. He was an illegitimate member of the family, yet he carried himself with an air of entitlement that rivaled even the most legitimate of the Medici lineage. Ippolito, despite his cardinal's robes, lived more like a prince than a prelate. He cultivated a vibrant court around himself, filled with poets, artists, and musicians. His charm was undeniable, his intellect sharp, and his military experience, though brief, gave him a certain swagger. His cousin, Alessandro de' Medici, sat upon the ducal throne in Florence, a position Ippolito deeply coveted. Alessandro, the first Duke of Florence, ruled with an iron fist, his decrees often harsh, his temper unpredictable. Many Florentines chafed under his rule, whispering about his excesses and his disregard for the city's old republican traditions. Ippolito, hearing these whispers, saw an opportunity. He presented himself as a champion of Florentine liberty, a figure who could restore the city to its former glory, free from Alessandro's heavy hand. He painted himself as the good Medici, the one who truly cared for the people. The rivalry between the 2 cousins intensified. Ippolito, emboldened by the discontent he perceived in Florence, decided to make his move. He embarked on a journey to Naples, where Emperor Charles V, the most powerful ruler in Europe, held court. Ippolito's mission was clear. He intended to lay before the emperor a litany of complaints against Alessandro, hoping to convince Charles V to remove Alessandro from power and perhaps even install Ippolito in his place. He gathered evidence, speaking with exiled Florentine Republicans and compiling a damning dossier of Alessandro's misdeeds. The journey itself was long and arduous under the Mediterranean sun. Ippolito traveled with a large entourage, his crimson cardinal's hat a stark contrast against the dusty roads. He held court in various towns along the way, speaking passionately about the plight of Florence and the need for a change in leadership. Alessandro, from his seat in Florence, was not unaware of Ippolito's machinations. Spies reported every move the cardinal made, every word he uttered. The news of Ippolito's impending audience with the emperor filled Alessandro with dread and fury. He understood the stakes involved. Should Ippolito succeed in swaying Charles V, Alessandro's dukedom, painstakingly secured, would vanish. He would be stripped of his power, his wealth, and his status. A counteroffensive was needed, a way to silence the ambitious cardinal before he could fully present his case. Ippolito reached Naples and secured his audience with the emperor. He spoke eloquently, presenting his arguments against Alessandro with conviction and passion. He detailed the alleged tyranny, the abuses of power, and the general unhappiness of the Florentine populace under Alessandro's rule. Charles V, a shrewd and pragmatic ruler, listened carefully. He did not immediately dismiss Ippolito's claims, nor did he immediately act upon them. He understood the delicate balance of power in Italy and the complexities of Florentine politics. After his meeting with the emperor, Ippolito began his journey back north, filled with a cautious optimism. He believed he had presented a compelling case, that Charles V would see the truth in his words and act accordingly. The road was still long, leading through the rugged terrain of southern Italy. He stopped in the town of Itri, a small settlement nestled between mountains and the sea. The air was heavy and humid. It was in Itri that Ippolito suddenly fell gravely ill. The symptoms were rapid and severe. He suffered from intense stomach pains, vomiting, and a burning fever. His body weakened quickly, his once vibrant energy draining away. His personal physician, a man named Maestro Stefano, attended to him, but nothing seemed to alleviate his suffering. The illness progressed at an alarming pace, defying the usual course of a common ailment. The cardinal's retinue watched in growing alarm as their charismatic leader faded before their eyes. Whispers began to circulate among the servants and guards. The illness felt too sudden, too violent, too specific. Within a few days of falling sick, Cardinal Ippolito de' Medici died. The official cause of death was given as a virulent fever, a common enough occurrence in the hot and often unsanitary conditions of the era. However, almost immediately a different story began to spread, carried by the wind and by frightened, hushed voices. Many believed Ippolito had not died of natural causes at all. The finger of suspicion pointed directly at his cousin, Alessandro de' Medici. It was widely believed that Alessandro, fearing Ippolito's successful appeal to the emperor, had arranged for his rival to be poisoned. The rumors persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. The public, already wary of Alessandro, found it easy to believe he would resort to such extreme measures to maintain his grip on power. The death of a powerful cardinal under such suspicious circumstances created a significant stir throughout the Italian peninsula and beyond. No formal charges were ever brought, and no definitive proof of poisoning ever emerged, at least not publicly. Maestro Stefano, Ippolito's physician, was later arrested by Alessandro's agents, ostensibly for questioning about the cardinal's death. He too, like his patient, died shortly after his arrest, adding another layer of mystery and suspicion to the already tangled narrative. The silence that followed his death spoke volumes to many. The ambitious, flamboyant Cardinal Ippolito de' Medici was gone, and Alessandro's path to unchallenged power in Florence seemed, for a time, clear. The memory of his sudden, violent end lingered like a dark cloud over the Medici court, a grim reminder of the lengths to which some would go for absolute authority. Number 7. Catherine de' Medici and the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. The year 1572 in France was a powder keg, constantly threatening to explode. Religious tensions simmered, sometimes erupting into open warfare between the Catholic majority and the Protestant Huguenots. Catherine de' Medici, Queen Mother, and the true power behind the throne of her son, King Charles IX, found herself caught in a desperate struggle to maintain peace and stability in a fractured kingdom. She had navigated the treacherous waters of French politics for years, constantly seeking a balance, often through alliances cemented by marriage. Her ultimate goal was to preserve the Valois dynasty and the French crown. One such attempt at reconciliation was the planned marriage between her daughter Marguerite de Valois, a Catholic, and Henry of Navarre, a leading Huguenot prince. This union, celebrated with much fanfare in Paris, was intended as a symbol of unity, a bridge between the warring religious factions. Huguenot nobles, including their revered leader Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, flocked to Paris for the wedding festivities. The city, usually a Catholic stronghold, suddenly swarmed with thousands of Huguenots, creating an uneasy atmosphere. Suspicion and resentment simmered just beneath the surface of the joyous celebrations. Admiral Coligny, a respected military strategist and a prominent Huguenot, gained increasing influence over the young King Charles IX. And he urged the king to support a Protestant military intervention in the Netherlands against Catholic Spain, a move Catherine vehemently opposed. She feared such an action would plunge France into another devastating war, one it could ill afford. Coligny's growing sway over her son deeply troubled Catherine. She saw him as a threat to her own political influence and to the delicate balance she was trying to maintain. On August 22nd, 1572, just days after the royal wedding, an attempt was made on Admiral Coligny's life. As he walked through the streets of Paris, a shot rang out from an upstairs window, wounding him in the arm and hand. The assassination attempt immediately sent shockwaves through the city. The Huguenots were outraged, convinced that Catholic plotters were responsible. They demanded justice and threatened retaliation. The air grew thick with menace. Catherine de' Medici, along with a select group of Catholic advisors, faced a terrifying dilemma. The Huguenots' demands for retribution coupled with their presence in such large numbers within Paris, created an immediate and extreme danger. Fear gripped the royal court. The Queen Mother and her advisors feared a Huguenot uprising, a swift and bloody revenge that could engulf the monarchy itself. There was a desperate urgency to act. Accounts from the time suggest that Catherine, in a moment of extreme panic and conviction, persuaded her hesitant son, King Charles IX, that a preemptive strike was necessary to save the kingdom from civil war and preserve his own life. She argued that the Huguenot leaders gathered in Paris posed an existential threat, and that decisive action was the only course left. The king, young and impressionable, under intense pressure and fearful for his own safety, reluctantly gave his consent for the elimination of the Huguenot leadership. The plan was set into motion for the early morning hours of August 24th, St. Bartholomew's Day. Church bells, which usually called the faithful to prayer, would ring out as a signal for the slaughter to begin. The gates of Paris were to be locked to prevent any Huguenots from escaping. The order was given to the city's Catholic militia, and the royal guards hunt down and kill every prominent Huguenot leader and their followers. As the pre-dawn darkness gave way to the first hints of light, the bells of Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois began to toll. The sound, eerie and ominous, spread across the sleeping city. The massacre erupted with horrifying swiftness and brutality. Catholic mobs, fueled by religious fervor and simmering hatred, surged into the streets. They broke into the homes where Huguenots lodged, dragging them out and butchering them without mercy. The streets ran red with blood. Admiral Coligny was among the first victims. He was found in his bed, gravely wounded from the earlier assassination attempt. Attackers burst into his room, stabbed him repeatedly, and then threw his body from a window into the courtyard below. His corpse was mutilated by the mob, dragged through the streets, and eventually hanged. The violence spread like wildfire beyond the initial targets. It became a wholesale slaughter of anyone identified as a Huguenot. Men, women, and children were caught in the frenzy. Their houses were looted, bodies piled high in the streets, and thrown into the Seine River. The royal guards, instead of maintaining order, actively participated in the carnage, ensuring the scale of the destruction. King Charles IX himself, from a window in the Louvre Palace, is said to have fired a musket at fleeing Huguenots. The massacre in Paris lasted for several days, but the horror did not stop there. The violence spread to other towns and cities across France, fueled by orders from the crown and the fervent anti-Huguenot sentiment that had been simmering for decades. Estimates of the dead ranged from thousands to tens of thousands. The exact number is still debated by historians, but the scale of the atrocity was undeniable. Catherine de' Medici's role in initiating and permitting the massacre became a subject of immense controversy and condemnation throughout Europe. While some contemporaries lauded her for her decisiveness in confronting a perceived threat, many more denounced her as a ruthless, Machiavellian queen, responsible for an unthinkable act of religious violence. Protestant nations reacted with outrage and horror, solidifying her image as a cruel and calculating figure. She became known as the Serpent Queen and Madame la Serpente. Her actions, undeniably aimed at stabilizing the French monarchy, instead plunged France into further religious wars, a grim legacy for a Medici queen. The event remains one of the darkest chapters in French history, forever associated with the name of Catherine de' Medici. Number 6. Pope Leo X's lavish spending and the indulgence scandal. Giovanni di Lorenzo de' Medici, son of Lorenzo the Magnificent, ascended to the papacy in 1513, taking the name Pope Leo X. His election marked a new era for the Medici family, extending their influence from Florence to the very heart of the Catholic Church in Rome. Leo X was a true product of the Florentine Renaissance. He possessed a refined taste for art, music, literature, and extravagant spectacles. He was a patron of Raphael, a collector of ancient manuscripts, and a connoisseur of fine dining. His court in Rome quickly became a hub of cultural brilliance, rivaling even the grandest secular courts of Europe. However, Leo X also inherited the Medici's love for luxury and a tendency towards lavish spending, perhaps even a recklessness with money. He believed that the papacy, as the supreme spiritual authority, should project an image of unparalleled grandeur and magnificence. This belief, combined with his personal inclinations, led to an extraordinary drain on the papal treasury. From the moment he became pope, Leo X engaged in a relentless pursuit of pleasure and patronage. He threw elaborate banquets, funded ambitious architectural projects, and supported a vast retinue of artists, musicians, scholars, and servants. His generosity was legendary, but it came at an immense cost. The sheer scale of his expenditure was staggering. He once reportedly said, "Since God has given us the papacy, let us enjoy it." He certainly took that sentiment to heart. He commissioned vast construction projects, including the ambitious rebuilding of St. Peter's Basilica, a monumental undertaking that required enormous sums of money. He bought exquisite tapestries, jewels, and antique artifacts. He gambled freely, organized lavish hunting parties, and staged theatrical productions that captivated Rome. To finance these endless projects and pleasures, Leo X resorted to increasingly desperate measures. He sold church offices, created new cardinalates and bishoprics, and levied heavy taxes on the faithful. Yet even these measures proved insufficient to keep pace with his insatiable spending. The most notorious of his financial strategies involved the widespread sale of indulgences. An indulgence in Catholic theology was a remission of temporal punishment due for sins, after the guilt of the sin had been forgiven through the sacrament of penance. Historically, indulgences had been granted for pious acts like pilgrimages or charitable donations. Under Leo X, however, the sale of indulgences became a highly organized, almost commercial enterprise. The primary motivation for this specific indulgence campaign was the urgent need to fund the colossal construction of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. To maximize revenue, the sale of indulgences was aggressively promoted throughout Europe, often by enthusiastic and sometimes unscrupulous agents. One of the most infamous was Johann Tetzel, a Dominican friar, who preached in Germany with a marketing slogan that sent shivers down the spines of many. As soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs. This direct link between a monetary payment and the salvation of souls, both for the living and for the dead, caused deep concern among many devout Christians. It seemed to reduce a sacred spiritual act to a mere transaction, a way for the wealthy to buy their way into heaven. The widespread perception of corruption and the blatant commercialization of salvation provoked outrage in many corners of Christendom. Among those deeply disturbed by these practices was an Augustinian monk and theology professor named Martin Luther, who taught at the University of Wittenberg in Saxony. Luther had been grappling with fundamental questions about sin, repentance, and salvation for years. The indulgence campaign, particularly Tetzel's brazen methods, pushed him to a breaking point. On October 31st, 1517, Martin Luther famously posted his 95 Theses on the door of the castle church in Wittenberg. These theses were not initially intended as a radical break from the church, but rather as a series of academic propositions for debate, questioning the theological validity and ethical implications of indulgences. He argued that the Pope had no authority over purgatory, that salvation was a gift from God, received through faith alone, not through works or monetary contributions. He challenged the very premise that a sinner could buy forgiveness or release from purgatory for themselves or their loved ones. Initially, Pope Leo X dismissed Luther's challenge as a minor theological squabble, a mere friar's quarrel. He underestimated the depth of discontent that Luther's words tapped into. The 95 Theses, quickly printed and distributed, spread like wildfire across Germany and beyond, resonating with a populace already frustrated by the Church's perceived wealth and abuses. What began as a local academic debate quickly escalated into a widespread religious movement. Leo X's response was slow and inadequate. He eventually issued papal bulls condemning Luther's views and excommunicating him, but by then, the damage was done. The scandal of the indulgences, fueled by the Pope's insatiable appetite for luxury and his need for funds, became a major catalyst. It was a scandal that exposed deep fissures within the Catholic Church and set in motion events that would forever alter the religious landscape of Europe. Number 5, Cosimo I's consolidation of power and brutal suppression. After the brutal murder of Duke Alessandro de' Medici in 1537, Florence found itself in a precarious position. The city's ruling family, the Medici, was suddenly without a clear successor. Into this dangerous void stepped a young, relatively unknown 18-year-old named Cosimo de' Medici. He was a distant cousin to the main branch of the family, descended from a lesser line, and many initially believed he would be a pliable, easily controlled figurehead. The powerful Republican exiles, who had chafed under Alessandro's tyrannical rule, saw this as their golden opportunity to reclaim Florence's ancient liberties and restore the Republic. Leading these Republican exiles was Filippo Strozzi the Younger, a wealthy banker and a long-time formidable opponent of the Medici. He rallied forces, raising a substantial army with the support of France and other anti-Medici factions. Strozzi believed that Florence under Cosimo would remain a tyranny, merely a different face on the same oppressive system. He dreamed of a free Florence, a return to the glorious days of the Republic. With his forces, he marched towards Florence, convinced that the people would rise up to support him and overthrow the fledgling ducal government. Cosimo, despite his youth and inexperience, proved to be far from the weak figurehead his early supporters had envisioned. He possessed a shrewd mind, a ruthless ambition, and a steely resolve. He quickly secured the support of Emperor Charles V, who had invested heavily in the Medici's rule over Florence. Cosimo wasted no time in preparing for the inevitable confrontation. He appointed seasoned military commanders and gathered his own loyal troops, ensuring his hold on the city was strong. The two forces met in August 1537 at the Battle of Montemerlo, just outside Florence. It was a decisive engagement. Cosimo's forces, well disciplined and strategically positioned, utterly crushed the Republican exiles. The battle was swift and brutal, a devastating blow to the hopes of a restored republic. Many prominent Republican leaders were captured, including Filippo Strozzi himself, along with his son Piero. The victory at Montemerlo cemented Cosimo's position as the undisputed ruler of Florence. It shattered the last significant challenge to his authority, paving the way for his absolute rule. Filippo Strozzi, the charismatic and influential Republican leader, was imprisoned in the Fortezza da Basso, a formidable fortress in Florence. His capture was a tremendous propaganda victory for Cosimo. Strozzi was subjected to intense interrogations and, according to various accounts, torture. Cosimo wanted to extract confessions, to implicate others in the conspiracy, and to fully dismantle any remaining Republican networks. Less than a year after his capture, in December 1538, Filippo Strozzi was found dead in a cell. The official verdict was suicide. A note, allegedly written by Strozzi, was found with his body, stating that he preferred death to further torture or continued imprisonment. However, widespread suspicion immediately arose. Many believed that Cosimo had ordered Strozzi's murder, staging it to appear as a suicide. Strozzi was a proud and resilient man, and the idea that he would take his own life was met with skepticism by many of his contemporaries. The suspicious circumstances of his death only solidified Cosimo's reputation as a ruthless ruler who would stop at nothing to eliminate his enemies. Cosimo's consolidation of power after Montemerlo was characterized by a systematic and brutal suppression of all opposition. He established a highly centralized state where all authority flowed from him. He created a formidable secret police force, a vast network of spies and informants that infiltrated every corner of Florentine society. Walls had ears, and whispers were quickly reported to the ducal palace. Dissidents were ruthlessly hunted down, imprisoned, or exiled. Their property was confiscated, and their families often faced ruin. Cosimo also systematically removed any remaining symbols or institutions of the old Florentine Republic. He reformed the city's legal system, ensuring that justice was administered strictly according to his will. He transformed the Palazzo della Signoria, the ancient seat of Republican government, into his personal ducal palace, effectively stamping his authority over the city's historical heart. He was relentless in his pursuit of those who had defied him, even those who fled abroad. Lorenzino de' Medici, Alessandro's assassin, lived in fear for decades, pursued by Cosimo's agents until he was finally murdered in Venice years later, a stark example of Cosimo's long reach and unforgiving nature. Under Cosimo I, Florence became a grand duchy, a fully fledged sovereign state, but at a profound cost to its republican traditions. His rule, while bringing stability and economic prosperity, was built on a foundation of fear and absolute control. The memory of Montemerlo, the suspicious death of Strozzi, and the ever-present network of spies served as a constant reminder that any challenge to the Grand Duke's authority would be met with swift and severe punishment. The iron grip of Cosimo I reshaped Florence, transforming it from a city of vibrant republican debate into a state where power flowed from a single formidable man. Number 4, the fall and execution of Savonarola. In the late 15th century Florence, a city renowned for its artistic brilliance and luxurious living, found itself under the sway of a mesmerizing and terrifying figure, Girolamo Savonarola. This Dominican friar, with his gaunt features and fiery sermons, arrived in Florence and quickly captured the imaginations and fears of its citizens. He preached with an electrifying intensity, denouncing the moral decay, the rampant luxury, and the perceived corruption of both the Florentine society and the Catholic Church itself. He condemned the art, the fashion, the elaborate festivals, and even the very spirit of humanism that characterized the Renaissance. Savonarola's influence grew rapidly, particularly after the death of Lorenzo the Magnificent in 1492. Lorenzo, a shrewd politician and a discerning patron, had tolerated Savonarola but kept him in check. However, after Lorenzo's passing and the subsequent weak rule of his son Piero de' Medici, Savonarola's power reached its zenith. When King Charles VIII of France invaded Italy in 1494 and marched towards Florence, Piero de' Medici's inept handling of the situation led to his expulsion from the city. In the ensuing power vacuum, Savonarola emerged as the de facto leader of Florence, establishing a strict puritanical theocracy. Under Savonarola's rule, Florence transformed. The city, once known for its joyous celebrations, became a place of austerity and severe piety. Savonarola's fervent followers, often children and young people, organized into religious militias, patrolled the streets, enforcing moral codes. They disrupted gambling dens, discouraged extravagant clothing, and monitored public behavior. His most famous acts were the bonfires of the vanities. On these occasions, in the Piazza della Signoria, thousands of secular items deemed sinful were publicly burned. These included fine silks, gambling tables, mirrors, musical instruments, pagan books, and even works of art that were considered indecent or idolatrous. Botticelli, a great artist, reportedly threw some of his own paintings into the flames. Savonarola's uncompromising stance extended to the highest levels of the church. He openly criticized Pope Alexander VI, accusing him of simony, corruption, and moral depravity. He refused to acknowledge the Pope's authority over Florence, insisting that God's will, as revealed to him, superseded any papal decree. This defiance naturally enraged Pope Alexander VI, a powerful and vindictive man. The Pope tried various tactics to silence Savonarola, including offering him a cardinal's hat, which Savonarola famously rejected, calling it a hat of blood. When these efforts failed, the Pope issued an excommunication against Savonarola, forbidding him from preaching and threatening Florence with an interdict. Despite the excommunication, Savonarola continued to preach, claiming the Pope was not a true shepherd of God's flock. However, his defiance began to erode his support among the Florentine populace. The strictness of his rule, the constant fear of divine retribution, and the economic hardship caused by the papal interdict began to weigh heavily on the city. The novelty of his puritanical regime wore off, and the desire for the city's former vivacity began to resurface. The political tide in Florence started to turn against him, with rival factions, particularly the Arrabbiati, the enraged ones, and the Compagnacci, the bad fellows, actively working for his downfall. The final act of Savonarola's drama involved a dramatic and ultimately disastrous challenge the ordeal by fire. A Franciscan friar, a rival of Savonarola's Dominican order, challenged Savonarola to prove his divine favor by walking through a roaring bonfire unscathed. Savonarola's followers, particularly his loyal friar Domenico de Pescia, accepted the challenge on his behalf. The event was set for April 7th, 1498, in the Piazza della Signoria. Thousands of Florentines gathered, eager to witness what they believed would be a miracle. However, prolonged disputes over the exact conditions of the ordeal, such as whether the friars could carry the host through the flames, caused endless delays. Then, a sudden downpour of rain extinguished the pyres. The ordeal was called off without anyone entering the fire. The failure of the ordeal by fire was a catastrophic blow to Savonarola's credibility and popularity. The crowd, previously eager for a spectacle, turned hostile. They felt mocked, their hopes for a miracle dashed. The mood in Florence soured decisively against him. Taking advantage of the shift in public opinion, the city authorities, urged on by the Pope and the anti-Savonarola factions, moved swiftly. On April 8th, a mob stormed the convent of San Marco, where Savonarola and his loyal friars had taken refuge. A violent confrontation ensued, and Savonarola, along with Friar Domenico and another loyal friar, Silvestro Maruffi, was arrested. Savonarola was then subjected to a series of brutal interrogations which included torture. Under immense physical and psychological duress, he confessed to various charges, including heresy and sedition. These confessions were later retracted, then reconfessed under further torture, making their validity highly questionable. The Florentine authorities, backed by papal legates, were determined to break him and discredit his prophecies. On May 23, 1498, Girolamo Savonarola, Friar Domenico, and Friar Silvestro were led to the Piazza della Signoria. A massive crowd had gathered to witness their end. A scaffold had been erected featuring a gibbet and a pyre. The three friars were stripped of their Dominican habits, publicly degraded, and then hanged. After their deaths, their bodies were burned on the pyre. To prevent any relics from being taken by his remaining sympathizers, their ashes were carefully collected and then ceremoniously thrown into the Arno River, ensuring no trace of the fiery prophet would remain. The fall of Savonarola marked the end of a dramatic and turbulent chapter in Florentine history, allowing the city to slowly return to its more secular pursuits, though the memory of his passionate sermons and the bonfires of the vanities lingered for generations. Number 3. The mysterious deaths in Francesco I's family. The Medici court in the late 16th century under Grand Duke Francesco I was a place of dazzling splendor, scientific curiosity, and dark whispers. Francesco himself was a complex figure, more drawn to alchemy, science, and his private passions than to the duties of statecraft. His life was overshadowed by several sudden and suspicious deaths that gripped the family and fueled rumors of poison and foul play. The first shadow fell early, touching his sister Lucrezia de' Medici, daughter of the powerful Cosimo I. She was married to Alfonso II d'Este, Duke of Ferrara, at a young age in 1558. The marriage was a political alliance meant to strengthen ties between two prominent Italian houses. However, Lucrezia's time in Ferrara was tragically short. She died in 1561, just a few years into her marriage, at the age of 17. The official cause of death was given as a putrid fever, a common diagnosis for various illnesses of the time. But the circumstances surrounding her rapid decline and death fueled immediate rumors. Some suggested she had been poisoned by her husband, the Duke of Ferrara, who perhaps found her sickly or inconvenient. Others whispered that her own father, Cosimo I, a notoriously ruthless ruler, had a hand in her demise, perhaps to prevent her from revealing family secrets or to serve some political purpose. The truth remained elusive, shrouded in silence, but the seed of suspicion within the Medici court was planted. Years later, in 1576, the whispers intensified, focusing on two more prominent female figures within the Medici family. Isabella de' Medici, Francesco's beloved and highly intelligent sister, was a woman of exceptional spirit and beauty. She had married Paolo Giordano Orsini, Duke of Bracciano, in 1558. However, their marriage was not a happy one. Paolo Giordano was often absent, engaged in military campaigns, and living a debauched life. Isabella, left mostly to her own devices in Florence, cultivated her own intellectual court, and reportedly engaged in romantic affairs, a dangerous transgression for a woman of her status in that era. In July 1576, Isabella died suddenly at the Medici villa of Cerreto Guidi. The official account stated she died of an apoplectic fit while washing her hair. However, this explanation was widely disbelieved. Contemporary rumors, fueled by her husband's known violent temper and Isabella's supposed infidelities, suggested a far more sinister truth. It was widely believed that Paolo Giordano Orsini, enraged by her alleged betrayal, had strangled Isabella to death with his own hands. The shocking part was the widespread belief that Francesco I, Isabella's own brother, either condoned or even sanctioned the murder. The justification often given was to protect the Medici family's honor and to prevent any further scandals stemming from Isabella's conduct. The event sent shockwaves through the Italian courts, solidifying Paolo Giordano Orsini's reputation as a brutal figure and casting a long shadow over Francesco's reign. Almost simultaneously, in April 1576, Francesco's first wife, Joanna of Austria, also died. Joanna, a Habsburg princess, had endured a difficult and largely unhappy marriage to Francesco. She was often ill, and their relationship was strained, particularly due to Francesco's open and long-standing affair with a Venetian noblewoman, Bianca Capello. Joanna's death was officially attributed to complications from childbirth or a fever. However, the timing was highly suspicious. Her death cleared the path for Francesco to finally marry Bianca Capello, his longtime mistress, a union he desperately desired, but which had been unthinkable while Joanna was alive. Rumors immediately began to circulate that Francesco himself had poisoned Joanna to remove her as an obstacle to his marriage with Bianca. While unproven, the suspicion lingered, painting a grim picture of the lengths Francesco would go to fulfill his desires. The climax of these mysterious deaths came in October 1587, striking Francesco I and Bianca Capello themselves. By this time, Bianca had been legitimized and married Francesco, becoming Grand Duchess of Tuscany. Their love affair was one of the most talked about stories in Europe, full of passion, scandal, and ultimately a tragic end. The couple was staying at the Villa di Poggio a Caiano, a beautiful Medici residence, when they both fell suddenly ill. Their symptoms were severe, including high fevers and violent vomiting. Within days, both Francesco and Bianca were dead. The official cause of death for both was malaria, a common illness in the marshy regions of Italy. However, the rapidity of their deaths and the fact that they died simultaneously ignited a fresh wave of intense speculation. Suspicion immediately fell upon Francesco's younger brother, Cardinal Ferdinando de' Medici. Ferdinando had always disapproved of Bianca and her influence over his brother. He believed Bianca was manipulative and had brought dishonor upon the Medici name. He also harbored ambitions for the Grand Duchy himself. With Francesco and Bianca gone, Ferdinando stood to inherit the throne, which he indeed did, becoming Grand Duke Ferdinando I. For centuries, the suspicion of poisoning lingered, with Ferdinando as the prime suspect. Modern scientific investigations in the early 2000s, analyzing remains believed to be those of Francesco and Bianca, reported finding traces of arsenic. This finding seemed to confirm the long-held suspicion of poisoning, though its conclusive nature is still debated among historians. The deaths of Francesco I and Bianca Capello remain one of the most compelling and tragic mysteries of the Renaissance, casting a final, dark pall over the Medici family's history, where ambition, love, and power intertwined with deadly consequences. Number 2. The murder of Alessandro de' Medici. In Florence, in the 1530s, was ruled by Alessandro de' Medici, the first Duke of Florence. He was a complex figure, rumored to be the illegitimate son of Pope Clement VII, a Medici pope. His rule was characterized by a heavy hand, reliance on imperial power, and an increasingly tyrannical style. Alessandro surrounded himself with guards, indulged in numerous affairs, and showed little regard for the republican traditions Florence once cherished. The city, once a vibrant republic, felt like a besieged fortress under his governance. Many Florentines, particularly the Republican exiles, longed for a return to liberty. One of Alessandro's closest companions and seemingly trusted confidantes was his cousin Lorenzino de' Medici. Lorenzino was a peculiar character, known for his classical scholarship, his melancholic disposition, and a strange obsession with ancient Roman history, particularly figures like Brutus, who assassinated tyrants. He cultivated a reputation as a dissolute rake, a loyal companion to Alessandro's nightly escapades, indulging in the Duke's vices. However, beneath this facade, Lorenzino harbored deep resentments and complex motivations. Some believed he was a true Republican at heart, yearning for Florence's freedom. Others saw him as a resentful, ambitious figure, perhaps even a madman. Lorenzino became Alessandro's closest accomplice in his nightly adventures, gaining the Duke's full trust. He often arranged illicit meetings for Alessandro, luring women to secluded locations for the Duke's pleasure. This seemingly innocent role provided Lorenzino with the perfect opportunity to plan his audacious act. He conceived a plan that relied entirely on Alessandro's lust and his complete trust in Lorenzino. On the night of January 5th, 1537, Lorenzino invited Alessandro to a secluded house, reportedly his own family residence, the Palazzo Medici on Via Larga. The lure was irresistible, a promised rendezvous with a beautiful woman. Some accounts say it was Lorenzino's aunt, others his own sister, Lucrezia, though Lucrezia later strongly denied any involvement. Regardless of the identity, the promise was a private, secret tryst. Alessandro, trusting Lorenzino implicitly, arrived at the house with only a single attendant and sent him away to maintain the secrecy of his visit. He was unarmed, vulnerable, and completely unsuspecting. Alessandro entered the house, reportedly removing his sword and cloak in an outer chamber, and then retired to a small room, intending to wait for his promised companion. He lay on a couch, perhaps already drowsy from drink, or the late hour. This was the moment Lorenzino had meticulously planned. He had prepared for this for months, even commissioning a special double-edged sword for the deed. Instead of a woman, Alessandro was met by Lorenzino and a hired bravo, a professional thug named Scoronconcolo. The attack was sudden and brutal. Lorenzino lunged at Alessandro, stabbing him repeatedly. The Duke, a strong and powerful man, fought back ferociously despite being unarmed and caught off guard. He struggled violently, desperately trying to defend himself. The small room became a scene of desperate struggle, a tangle of bodies, and the sound of muffled blows. Scoronconcolo joined the attack, and between them, they overwhelmed Alessandro. The Duke eventually fell, bleeding profusely from multiple stab wounds. He died there, on the couch, in the quiet, secluded room. After the murder, Lorenzino, far from celebrating, found himself in a state of agitated terror. He frantically tried to cover his tracks. He and Scoronconcolo fled the house, leaving Alessandro's body behind. Lorenzino immediately fled Florence, disappearing into the night, riding at breakneck speed towards Bologna, then Venice, and eventually seeking refuge in France. He later published an apology for his actions, claiming he had killed Alessandro to liberate Florence from tyranny, to restore the Republic. This justification, however, was met with skepticism by many who saw his act as one of personal ambition or psychological instability. The discovery of Alessandro's body the next morning threw Florence into chaos. The initial reaction was one of disbelief and panic. The city's leaders, including Cardinal Innocenzo Cibo and Bishop Maurizio Sforza, immediately moved to suppress the news of the Duke's death, fearing a popular uprising or an invasion by exiled Republicans. They secretly moved the body and quickly convened a council to choose a successor. The situation was dire, a power vacuum threatening to engulf the city in civil war. It was into this volatile situation that Cosimo I de' Medici. Then, a young and relatively obscure figure stepped forward. Through shrewd political maneuvering and the decisive support of the Emperor Charles V's envoy, he managed to secure his own claim to the dukedom, bypassing other more senior Medici family members. Cosimo's swift and decisive action prevented widespread anarchy. Lorenzino, meanwhile, became a hunted man. He spent years in exile, pursued by agents of the Medici family and the Holy Roman Emperor, living under constant threat. He was finally assassinated in Venice in 1548, 11 years after Alessandro's murder, a testament to the long memory and far-reaching vengeance of the Medici. The murder of Alessandro de' Medici, perpetrated by his own cousin, exposed the deep internal fissures within the family and the brutal lengths to which ambition and political ideology could drive individuals in Renaissance Florence. Number 1. The Pazzi Conspiracy. The year 1478 found Florence flourishing under the unofficial but undeniable rule of Lorenzo de' Medici, known as Lorenzo the Magnificent. He was a master politician, a brilliant patron of the arts, and the undisputed head of the Medici family, which had risen from merchant bankers to the de facto rulers of the Florentine Republic. Lorenzo, with his charisma and cunning, had consolidated power, subtly undermining the remnants of Republican government. However, his rise created powerful enemies, none more formidable than the Pazzi family. The Pazzi, another wealthy and influential Florentine banking family, resented the Medici's dominance. They saw themselves as equals, perhaps even superiors in lineage and wealth. They bristled under Lorenzo's control, feeling increasingly marginalized in the city's political and economic life. The simmering resentment was exacerbated by several key events. Lorenzo had thwarted the Pazzi's attempt to acquire the lucrative right to collect papal revenues. He also arranged the marriage of his sister, Bianca, to Guglielmo de' Pazzi, but carefully ensured the Pazzi gained no political advantage from the union. The Pazzi felt humiliated and their ambition curdled into bitter hatred. Crucially, the Pazzi found a powerful ally in Pope Sixtus IV. The Pope, a man of strong will and political ambition, had his own grievances with Lorenzo. Lorenzo had opposed the Pope's attempts to expand papal influence in Romagna, particularly in the city of Imola. The Pope had also appointed his nephew, Girolamo Riario, as the Lord of Imola and Forli, a move Lorenzo opposed and refused to finance. These diplomatic and financial disputes led to a deep personal animosity between the Pope and Lorenzo. Sixtus IV, eager to curb Medici power and perhaps even seize control of Florence, actively supported the Pazzi family in their plot. The core conspirators included Francesco de' Pazzi, the most aggressive and impulsive of the Pazzi brothers, his uncle, Jacopo de' Pazzi, the Patriarch and the Archbishop of Pisa, Francesco Salviati, a Medici enemy who saw his appointment to the archbishopric blocked by Lorenzo. Cardinal Raffaele Riario, the Pope's young great-nephew, was also unwittingly drawn into the plot, used as a pretext for the conspirators to gather in Florence. The plan was audacious, to assassinate Lorenzo and his younger brother Giuliano de' Medici, thereby crippling the Medici family and overthrowing their rule. The initial plan involved poisoning the Medici brothers at a banquet at the Villa de Fiesole, where the impressionable young Cardinal Riario was staying. However, Giuliano de' Medici did not attend the banquet, perhaps due to illness or other commitments. This forced the conspirators to change their strategy. The new plan was even more daring and sacrilegious to strike during Easter Sunday Mass on April 26, 1478, inside the Florence Cathedral, Santa Maria del Fiore. The moment of the elevation of the host, when all would be kneeling and supposedly off guard, was chosen as the precise moment for the double murder. This decision, however, caused a problem. The original assassin, chosen for Lorenzo, a condottiere named Giovan Battista da Montesecco, refused to commit murder in a church, deeming it too sacrilegious. Two priests, Antonio Maffei da Volterra and Stefano da Bagnoni, were brought in to replace him, though their lack of military experience would prove critical. Bernardo Bandini Baroncelli and Francesco de' Pazzi himself were tasked with killing Giuliano. On that fateful Easter Sunday, the magnificent Duomo was packed with worshippers. Lorenzo and Giuliano de' Medici stood near the altar, surrounded by the congregation. As the bells chimed and the host was elevated, the assassins made their move. The priests, Maffei and Baglione, lunged at Lorenzo. Their attack was clumsy. They wounded him but failed to deliver a fatal blow. Lorenzo, quickly drawing his sword, fought back, assisted by his friends and bodyguards. He managed to escape, wounded, into the sacristy, pulling the heavy bronze doors shut behind him. Meanwhile, Francesco de' Pazzi and Bernardo Bandini Baroncelli attacked Giuliano de' Medici. Their attack was swift and brutal. Francesco de' Pazzi, driven by rage, stabbed Giuliano so furiously that he accidentally wounded himself in the leg. Giuliano fell, stabbed repeatedly, and bled to death on the cathedral floor. He had suffered 19 wounds. The chaos in the Duomo was immense. Screams filled the air. People panicked, running for their lives, trampling over each other. Outside the cathedral, another part of the conspiracy unfolded. Archbishop Salviati, accompanied by a group of armed men, marched to the Palazzo della Signoria, the seat of Florentine government. Their aim was to seize the palace and establish a new Pazzi-led government. However, the plan went awry. The palace guards were alerted, and the doors were quickly secured. The archbishop and his men found themselves trapped inside the courtyard. News of the attack spread like wildfire through Florence. Lorenzo, having survived and barricaded himself in the sacristy, quickly emerged, rallying his supporters. The Florentine people, despite years of Medici political maneuvering, largely remained loyal to Lorenzo. They rose up in furious defense of the Medici. The cry, "Pal, Pal," the Medici coat of arms featuring balls echoed through the streets, signaling their support for Lorenzo. The ensuing hours were a bloodbath. The Florentine populace, inflamed with rage, hunted down the conspirators. Francesco de' Pazzi, wounded and desperate, was captured by the mob. He was brutally lynched, his body thrown from a window of the Palazzo della Signoria, and then dragged through the streets. Archbishop Salviati, trapped inside the palace, was summarily hanged from a window of the Palazzo della Signoria, still dressed in his episcopal robes. Jacopo de' Pazzi, attempting to flee, was hunted down, captured, and also hanged. A body like Francesco's was dragged through the city, then thrown into the Arno River, pulled out, and rehanged from a gallows before being thrown into the Arno again. The fury of the Florentine people knew no bounds. Many others suspected of complicity were summarily executed, their bodies displayed publicly. The Pazzi family was decimated, their property confiscated, their name erased from public records, even their crest was defaced wherever it was found. Pope Sixtus IV, enraged by the failure of the conspiracy and the execution of his archbishop, responded by placing Florence under an interdict, excommunicating Lorenzo and his supporters. He even declared war on Florence, aided by the Kingdom of Naples. The Pazzi conspiracy, intended to destroy the Medici, instead cemented Lorenzo's power and transformed him into an even more formidable leader, ensuring the Medici's grip on Florence for decades to come, albeit at a terrible cost of blood and intrigue.